Awesome. No worries. Thanks for jumping in, everybody. I'll give it a little bit more time before we jump straight into the conversation. Hope you're having a good day. And thanks again for putting your hand up to be involved in this. Whilst we do wait for people to roll in, just calling out that we've got the Q&A open today. So if you're familiar with Zoom, down in your kind of little Zoom panel, there is a Q&A section, different to the chat, but the Q&A is where you can kind of throw questions at us throughout. So feel free to use that. We'd love to understand kind of what's on your mind. We've got a bunch of people here who can help. So a lot of experience across all the different tools, scaling on Xero, a lot of experience with consolidation, intercompany recs, reporting, all of that kind of stuff. So if you're here for that reason, which I imagine you are, feel free to take advantage, ask questions, and we will definitely help out as much as we can. On that note, I might kick things off. I'm sure there'll be more people rolling in as we get started, but first and foremost, thank you all for your time today. My name's Jack Teal. I am the APAC commercial lead at Mayday. At Mayday, we're on a mission to mend month end for larger Xero businesses, beginning with the needs of those who are multi-entity. So we're talking about intercompany recharges, cross-entity bank reconciliations, keeping intercompany loans in balance, all the things. These are all the things that we're solving today. And as a little bit of background on me, I started my career as an accountant at PwC about 10 years ago, specifically in audit, which I didn't love, which is why I'm not in that role now. But that's where I completed my chartered. I then worked as an advisor to SMBs at a smaller firm at the height of Xero's growth, and have spent the last 5 years in a variety of different startup roles across the accounting tech ecosystem. So very passionate about this space, and personally as bullish as ever about where Xero's going. It's great to see a lot of larger businesses succeeding on the platform, skipping the mid-market ERP altogether. And yeah, succeeding with Xero as their underlying accounting software. As you may or may not be aware, last year we ran a webinar series called Building an Enterprise Level System with Xero. Fathom was part of that, and it was absolutely well received, packed out across 12 different sessions. So we want to kind of continue that conversation today with a little bit more specific focus around consolidation, reconciliation, and reporting. Because we understand that the narrative that Xero plus its ecosystem needs a little bit more attention, and there's a lot of people out there not aware of the full capabilities of Xero plus apps. So yeah, hopefully we can kind of give you a little bit more insight into where Mayday and Fathom fit in among the ecosystem. Me alone, though, certainly wouldn't be enough to kind of give this topic the desired coverage. So I've got some other experts here with me today. So I might hand over to them to give some quick introductions. So Stian, if you're happy, I might throw to you first. Yeah, just a quick intro would be great.
Yeah, absolutely. So, hey everyone, my name is Stian Horn. I am the sales manager for Fathom here in APAC. And for those of you that may not know Fathom that well, Fathom is a reporting and analytics forecasting consolidation app. Yeah, that's probably good enough for now, I reckon.
Yeah, that's good. Awesome. Ryan.
Thanks for having me, guys. Well, what my background is, I am a chartered accountant. I started in audit just like Jack, so from humble beginnings. But I was fortunate enough in my mid to late 20s to move into startups and be the CFO of a couple of particularly fast-growing businesses, also multi-entity as well. But about 6 years ago, I moved into my own corporate advisory business with my business partner, and we've now grown that into an AFR fast-starting consulting company, and have now worked as a remote virtual CFO, whatever you want to call it, for over 100 SMEs in the last 5 years. And I'm also a long-time Fathom user, power user, I would say.
Brilliant. Awesome. Thanks, Ryan. And Jesse.
Hi guys, similar to Jack and Ryan, have a background in audit as well. Came from EY. I'm now the financial controller of Harris Real Estate, a large real estate agency based in Adelaide, South Australia. Just like a lot of you guys, we're a multi-entity organization, and we currently use Mayday and Fathom as well.
Cool. No worries. Well, thanks guys for your introductions and obviously for joining me today. The last thing I'll add in terms of context is, as part of having this conversation, I guess the reason why it's so topical right now is, Xero's been around for a long time, a relatively long time now, more than 15 years, I think it is. And so, there weren't that many big businesses using Xero 5, 10 years ago. But those small businesses that start on Xero eventually grow up, become bigger, more complex. And at some point, they begin to reach the limits of what Xero is capable of and what it's designed for. And so they look to transition over to a bigger, more expensive, more complex accounting product. But over the course of time, the reasons why you'd have to leave have become fewer and fewer as more and more tools have built onto the Xero ecosystem, thanks to its API, and solved those issues, allowing businesses to scale and grow further with Xero as the underlying GL. So that, I suppose, hoping to set the scene a little bit, we want to make sure that we cover off on what Xero does really well. So I'll just kind of flick over to the agenda for today. So what does Xero do well with regard to reconciliation of intercompany accounts, consolidations, group reporting, these kinds of things? What are the challenges that you then begin to experience as you grow? So you go from one entity to 2 to 3 to 4 to 5. Maybe you open up in different regions, have different currencies, grow your finance team, whatever the case may be. What are those challenges that you're going to begin to experience if you're not using anything else but Xero? And then what does life look like once you've got a Fathom in place, once you've got a Mayday in place, and what are you able to do with the improved control, improved visibility, time saving, those kinds of things. So we certainly want to kind of start with, at least, if you are on Xero, you're not using Fathom and Mayday yet, what can you do relatively easily and well with respect to this topic? So, I mean, Ryan, I don't know if you don't mind kicking us off. And your answer can be, please don't do anything. Please add an add-on straight away. But I am sure there's a scenario where you're a simple two-entity group that maybe, the ability for Xero just to do exports quite quickly and simply is sufficient. But I would love to get your perspective.
Look, I think on that specific question, like if it's a two entity group and one's non-operating, like if you just have a whole co and one operating business, and assuming they're both Australian businesses, yeah, that's probably not enough to then start going to Xero files into a Fathom. Like, it also depends also on how much movement there is. I think if there was a lot of movement in share capital, you would consider it, just because often the operating entity doesn't actually have the equity in it, and like net assets will be understated. But like if you had one operating and then a dormant second entity, I probably wouldn't really go there. I think it's when you really start having like two operating entities, two entities that are busy, that actually have transactions, movements, bank accounts, people in them. It usually comes from like splitting Australian businesses into two different parts. It could be two different states for risk, or it could be, we have an asset business and we have the operating, like something like that, or international subs. I think that's where you really start to really think about having multiple Xero files, and then you'll get the challenges in the second point, and then you'll think about Fathom and Mayday.
No, that's helpful. I mean, Jesse, I don't know if what your experience was actually personally, life prior to Fathom, if it was prior to your time there, were you guys able to kind of make things work for a while without an add-on?
Yeah, we did. So we had two operating entities initially, and we just consolidated everything via Excel, which was challenging in itself. We've now grown from 2 entities to 9 entities, so I couldn't imagine doing it on Excel now. I think the challenges I found, particularly with the use of Fathom, for instance, every time we added a new chart of account, trying to do eliminations and then consolidating it, and then finding out nothing's balancing, similar to Mayday, just trying to do the intercompany matrix just wouldn't work. So for me personally, I think if, like to Ryan's point, if you've got more than one operating entity, I think just make the switch and change to Mayday or Fathom straight away, I would say.
And I think, I mean, just to add in from my experience on the Mayday side, or the intercompany transactions perspective, I think there's probably step one would be the consolidation side. Two trading entities, as Ryan kind of mentioned, is probably sufficient to start saying we need something on the console side. But that doesn't necessarily mean you're going to have a high volume of intercompany transacting yet. So, I think there's two things to consider here. One is, do we need, the consolidated accounts? And if the definition we're kind of rolling with is 2 or more actively trading businesses under the same group, tick. But then if there's only 2 or 3 intercompany transactions a month, then you're probably not going to need something like a Mayday to help manage that. But, you know, same thing, consider the volumes, and at some point it will become a bit too much of a challenge. So then if we kind of push forward, you know, from there and say, cool, Xero can handle some of those simple scenarios and make life easy for you as a single entity business, obviously, and the kind of very early stages of the multi-entity cycle. Stian, I was wondering to get your perspective on that second dot point there. What is it that most people are coming to you with in terms of their major pain points and saying, all right, we're now on this journey, we're exploring console and reporting tools. Why are they coming to you guys? What are they looking for?
Yeah, it's a good question. Look, I think primarily it's to shave down on the time, right? Like above anything else. Once you grow to a certain point, I think for a lot of the people I talk to, it's that sort of knowing that every single month it's this like looming big project of essentially puzzling together this multi-currency or just multi-entity consolidation piece that just drives people crazy at the end of the day. It just feels like one of those tasks that you have to do over and over again. And, some of the people that I speak to spend days on it. So we're talking, number of days per month spent on this one thing that when you have an add-on can be solved in a matter of minutes. So that's probably number one by far. But the other part of it is also just more around having sort of an easy way to do, more visual reporting that is relevant to all stakeholders and not just the finance people in the business, right? So when you get to that point and, for example, the board is requesting more visual reporting and you're adding those sort of tasks and things that take, again, hours, days every month into the picture, yeah, it just becomes a bit of a nightmare. And that's typically when we see people come to us and say, hey, what can you do to help us do this type of visual reporting, but then also save the time?
And I mean, if you're spending multiple days, I'm sure there's a clear ROI in terms of, cost back to time saving. But I mean, Ryan, it'd be interesting to get your perspective on how you would advise someone kind of considering any app being added onto their stack and saying, how do you weigh that up against time saving? Because I think it's easy to kind of get in the mindset that, well, this is my job, like this is what I do. So me spending 2-3 days on something that's my job, that's fine. That's my month end. That's what I do. That's my life as an accountant. Versus having, cool, I can pay some money and have that done quicker, but what do I then do with that time? How do you kind of approach that thought process? Because I think that's one of the things that comes into play most often in people's mind is, cool, this tool does it for me, but it's a cost that I didn't have before.
Yeah. It's an interesting one. I mean, if people, I think when you talking about like large ERPs and it's costing $50,000-$100,000 implementation, like you've got to really think about ROI. Like the ROI on some of this stuff is just so straightforward that like the cost of a Fathom subscription, or a couple to sort of bring it together compared to that time is just so obvious. Like I don't think it's much. I think the word here. There's no glory in sort of like spending all that time on the console, for example. And what I was going to say to stand point is that, if you're going to Fathom for the initial problem of the console, like that's something that would totally get automated and sped up as long as you spend the time setting it up correctly. But it's the way that you would then report back to the business. Like the things I like about Fathom is the console is like a foundational piece, and then it's like non-financial KPIs and all things that Xero doesn't even have. Xero will never have like number of customers. Xero will never have churn percentage. Xero will never have number of FTEs. Like it's somewhere in there. You can go in and count the sub ledger or the number of people and work out how many part-timers there are. But it's like, and you have to try to get that data in, but it's like, it's all those other things as well. Like thankfully the cost of these softwares are fairly modest, that the ROI is significant.
Yeah, I mean, I think it is a very different conversation, Stian. You might have noticed this too. If you're speaking to someone who's considering an ERP, the price isn't an issue, talking to yourself or us, probably. But if that's not the world they're in, if the world that they're in is they're used to Xero being their entire accounting platform, paying $70 a month, and then someone comes along and says, oh, we're an add-on to that and we're going to cost more, or they're considering your software in comparison to their Microsoft or Google subscription or something like that. Obviously, the scale is completely different, but it is an interesting thought process. It's interesting to see how people's minds work. I don't need to go talk about it too much, but Stian, did you have anything you wanted to add to that?
Now, I mean, you're 100% right. Like, you know, I definitely, I talk to people as well that are kind of sitting in that stage of, you know, we have grown to a size now where we kind of have to make a choice, right? We either have to develop a tech stack that allows us to do most of what an ERP would allow us to do, but it potentially, you know, can take a bit longer. There's a lot of apps to explore. There's a lot of this, but to your point, the cost saving, you know, is night and day. Like when you put, you know, apps that you can add on to Xero up against an ERP solution. Now, I'm not trying to say that, you know, it's necessarily, you know, the exact same across, but still, like the cost in those two is just, yeah, it's just night and day basically.
Yeah, yeah. And well, let's park the pricing conversation. Jesse, I was kind of keen to get your thoughts from with respect to challenges that appear as you grow on the intercompany side. So we've spoken about consolidations and reporting. What was it that was happening from an intercompany perspective for you guys before you went with Mayday, and what kind of led to that being like, this is now a priority for us to solve?
That's a very good question, Jack. We spent probably, I would have said when we first started doing intercompany transactions, it probably took us a week or more trying to reconcile everything. For instance, when looking at Mayday recently, we do close to 400 multi-entity recharges every month, which beforehand would involve us raising invoices and bills on either side, and then doing an intercompany matrix at the end, and then trying to reconcile that. So for us, I think finding the product Mayday was a no-brainer because of the time spent of raising these bills and invoices individually. So it's night and day compared to what we were doing beforehand.
Ah, nice. And I mean, that's obviously kind of where we come in, and what we're trying, I suppose, the people who come to me and start talking, because I think it's a newer category, to be honest. You know, I think consolidation and reporting is something that people, at least from my experience, are more aware of. Fathom's been around for a while, but there's also been other tools in this space for probably in the 10-year more vicinity in terms of Xero's lifetime. And so they've been at events. It's a category that's well known. It's on most people's radar to say at some point, you know, once we're at a certain size, we know we've got to go down this road and get a reporting and consolidation app to give us what we need. But I think for a lot of people, they're not even aware that there's a solution for intercompany transactions, recharges, and loan reconciliations, which is a big challenge for us. That's our job, right? Is to make sure people know that we exist. Um, how did you guys even find out that did you think, oh, there's got to be someone doing this stuff, or how did you kind of come across it?
Honestly, I didn't even think there was such a solution. I just thought, well, I'm gonna have to stick with my spreadsheets. Like initially, we would download reports from Xero from all entities, look at which chart of accounts we wanted to recharge back, and then I started building out a bit of an automation myself. I think just starting to increase our tech stack and getting to know other products. I think I came across your product, and I'm pretty sure we had a conversation early in the piece, and I didn't realize there was such a product for something like Xero. We had looked at potentially moving to a bigger ERP just because of this issue. So you guys have certainly solved that.
No, that's cool. And just as a reminder to everyone tuning in, if you do have questions, please chuck them down in the Q&A. Would love to answer them. You know, if you're thinking about using a Fathom, thinking about using Mayday, or you're using them already, using something else, you've got some thoughts, feedback. Like, I'm sure there's a reason why you're here tuning in. So if you've got some questions, please chuck them at us, and we'll be happy to answer them. Just to kind of transition now to point 3 there on the agenda, guys. And Ryan, I might throw to you first. You know, you've got a lot of experience with Fathom. You've rolled this out, I assume, with a bunch of the people that you work with, a bunch of clients, maybe even in your own time as a CFO. What's the I know we've already spoken about the challenge and sort of touched on the benefits, but what do you see as kind of like the outcome of putting something like Fathom in place? What's the long-term benefits?
I think the long-term benefits is I think this improves the quality of reporting like every single month. Like we generally try to do consolidated reports for all of our clients every single month, opposed to this idea that you just do your console at the end of the year and then you finally look at it for the first time. And otherwise, you sort of got P&L A and P&L B sort of somehow merged together. I also find like the accounting hygiene is really useful long term by way of like you see businesses that have sold several years later, and the board packs that we present out of Fathom and the care factor around the accounting structure, because when you do have Fathom, you have to really also care about the general ledger and understand where everything goes so that everything is neatly. To do it right also forces a level of diligence, and I've seen that outcome be, highly useful, like later on raising capital, or selling businesses where everything is really clear and manicured, and you've got great reports. These are important assets for your data room. Um, I think that's the one thing I see, and just like the ability to present back to boards. Well, that's what we use it for. We use it for board reporting for all our clients. Every client gets a monthly board report. It's always consolidated. And not only is it balance sheet P&L consolidated, but it's also got each individual entity, how it sort of rolls up. You can do concise and detailed. We do combined calendars that we've made inside Fathom, executive summaries, like things like that. It's just about like also leveling up. Like if, I think that's just an important asset to the business for now and for later.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point. Just, business sale, these kinds of things, having everything kind of in order, in check, scalable solution that can be handed over to somebody else. I think,
Totally.
the point you made earlier, consolidation might be the trigger to say, hey, we need to look at a solution, but then there's so many other things that come after that, once you've got a tool in place. So no, that's awesome. Thanks, Ryan. And Jesse, what does it mean from your perspective? I do have a question in the Q&A that I'll throw to in a second, but just get your thoughts very quickly on this kind of side of things, the actual benefits that you've got.
Yeah, I think Ryan's point's interesting. I certainly think this hygiene and this care factor you take over your reports, particularly when you introduce something like Fathom. We we've just done 6 mergers and acquisitions over the last 12 months, and through that due diligence process and looking at these P&Ls, you'd get the Excel dump of their P&L and not making much sense of it. It doesn't really tell the story. So moving to something like Fathom tells that story. We're now reporting to we're making 6 different shareholder reports each month and a consolidated report to our board as well. So the story it tells is really important. But yeah, just all of it has been a game changer for us in terms of how we're now transacting. And our month-end close has been really important to have both Mayday and Fathom to complete that.
Awesome. And Jesse, I might throw to you again, just from a Q&A perspective. We do have a question here, which is, will there be appetite to expand from Xero to an ERP going forward? So, George, feel free to correct me if I'm wrong, but if I understand this correctly, it's because you mentioned earlier, Jesse, that you were looking at an ERP. You obviously found Mayday, you've got Fathom, which solved the problems that you were having. Does that mean ERP is off the radar completely, or is it, in your mind, look, it's delayed the need for it by 12 months, 24 months, indefinitely? Where do you sit with that at the moment?
At the moment, we have no need to change to a bigger ERP. For us, I think as we've grown, we've obviously had those discussions, but we've realized a lot of the applications that we use in our industry only integrate with Xero. So moving to a bigger ERP wasn't really an option for us. I'm not sure if there's a threshold of which we would need to move to a bigger one, but so far with Mayday and Fathom, it's solving all our issues that we had prior.
I think it's interesting, Ryan. I'd be good to get your thoughts as well. But I think it's interesting because in a lot of people's minds, I think it's, oh, we're a big business. It's time to go to an ERP. But what does that mean? We've got billion-dollar turnover companies that use Mayday, so it's obviously not revenue, because if you're selling trains and each train sale is a few $1 million, you're not going to have huge volumes of transactions, and that's fine. There's other businesses that are going to transact 10,000 times a day, e-commerce platforms, things like that. But that data's in in an Amazon or a Shopify, and they're just pushing a daily total through to Xero, and that can also scale indefinitely. So I think it's being really clear on what's the actual problem that you're having that Xero can't handle. And Ryan, I don't know, do you have some experience with what those key problems are that actually, that is a reason to go? Or the type of business? I think manufacturing and those kinds of places, it's a little bit more relevant.
Yeah, I was going to say that it's a complexity factor than it is necessarily a volume factor or turnover factor, because those things are so different. Like services businesses are reasonably easy to do for a long time. Yeah, I think it's complexity. It's any time that the actual business case of doing an ERP is fundamentally a better cost to the business. That means that you must have a large amount of people's time also consumed in these activities, not necessarily the cost of the underlying software. It comes down to manufacturing and inventory, in my view, um, or a country where Xero isn't supported for some reason, and I know there's a lot of them these days. But look, I would still think that a lot of businesses, you mentioned one up to $1 billion, um, it comes down to complexity. But there are businesses that will live on Xero until they're turning over hundreds of millions of dollars.
Yeah.
That's my view, and I think you're right. The same thing about like the way that you integrate things. Like if you have Stripe, there are so many people out there that don't integrate their Stripe account; they only integrate the bank account. Yeah, or they're kind of like leaving systems slightly bespoke where Xero's really recording the totals or a weekly transfer, and then maybe using some accrual entries to sort of catch up the difference on timing, which can sometimes just save the fact of just getting copious data into Xero for potentially no benefit.
Yeah, okay, cool. No worries. And I've got some clarity here on the question. So I think I did misunderstand the question. Hopefully still useful to have the conversation. But George said, for context, the business is not operating on Xero at the moment. So wondering if Mayday Fathom will always be exclusive to Xero. Stian, you can probably speak to this from the Fathom side. I don't think you guys are exclusive to Xero.
No, we're not. I would say Xero is probably where we get most of our customers from. But yeah, Fathom does integrate with QuickBooks, with MyHub. It does have the ability to pull in financials through Excel. And we are also looking at quite a few new integrations towards also the ERP space, like we talked about today. So yeah, a bit more connection points available there.
Yeah, no worries. Cool. And George, from a Mayday side, at the moment, it's just Xero that we integrate with, but QuickBooks is coming soon. Beyond that, it'll just be subject to kind of what people ask us for, I think. But it is an interesting point, and the discussion I had on a webinar last week around this, which is, we're talking with Approval Max, which is another tool out there in the market, and they integrate with NetSuite, and I think that says everything, right? If you've got an Approval Max integrating with NetSuite, what does that say about the ERP? It's not actually the all-in-one that many claim it to be. It still needs these tools, whether it be a Fathom off to the side, you're exporting data into a spreadsheet, putting that into Fathom to connect it up with a bunch of other accounting files that you've got, or whatever the scenario is. I think it's important to understand Xero has an amazing ecosystem. ERPs still need, in a lot of scenarios, other tools to go along with them. I hope that helps, George. Steph has a question. What level of efficiency is now being realized by using Mayday or Fathom in multi-entity applications? What's the time saving? So, I mean, Jesse, you've got the first-hand experience here. Maybe you can give us an idea.
Yeah, it is a good question. I think reflecting on it before, when we're talking about the intercompany transactions, I do remember it took us up to a week producing these bills and invoices, purely because we'd do it and then we'd reconcile it and realize it was unreconciled and wouldn't balance. So it has saved us probably in the magnitude of probably days or weeks at the moment. I'm on both sides using Mayday and Fathom. So yeah, it's honestly saved us a lot of time.
Cool. No worries. Ryan, I don't know if you've got any specific scenarios to add to that.
I think the time saving is relevant to the number of, like, just like with Jesse's example saying, I think it was up to 9 transactions, a lot of recharges, then that's going to have massive saving as well. It also just extends. It just depends on like how much of that stuff there is. sometimes there should be a little bit of that. Like some people are like, oh, I've got company A and company B, but we don't recharge anything over. And I'm like, well, why not? Now, is there an issue? Like, why are you not doing that? Like, is it international sub? Are you aware of transfer pricing? Like, are you just putting all the costs in one place and then you've got this like profitable business and then one unprofitable where you should be recharging it over? One, tax efficiency, unless it's a tax console group, or you're just distorting P&Ls and not actually giving people a view of company A versus company B. Like some people are not doing a lot of intercompany work and you're kind of like, why not? You have
And I
these
think that's
companies. Like, isn't there
a really
stuff
good.
going between them?
It is a very good point to consider the benefits of software, not always just solely as a time saver, but also to enable you to do things that you just couldn't have done before.
You weren't doing before. Yeah.
I think a big one for us is, businesses are doing recharges between their entities, but because it's a big time-consuming process, they'll often leave it to the end of the year and just do it as a big kind of once-off. And what does that mean for your month-on-month reporting, month-on-month P&Ls? So,
Oh,
there's a huge benefit that's not caught up in time saving in a lot of scenarios, that it's just the quality of the reporting and the hygiene that you kind of spoke about earlier as well.
that's a good one. Look, but one thing we don't believe in is like, yeah, end of year adjustments or end of quarter adjustments. Like, why is one month more important than the other to get right? Like, the idea of these tools is that every month is right as it should be or could be.
Yeah. Yeah. Jesse, did you have something to add to that?
No, I agree with Ryan. I think there's no reason to be doing it at the end of the year or every quarter. We should be doing it once a month. And particularly, I think I mentioned before, we present 6 different shareholder reports each month, and to get that data and that integrity right every month is really important. And without the tools like Mayday, like you can't do that in a quick enough time, particularly when we're running 9 different entities. So having that efficiency from Mayday to produce that to then give that clarity to our shareholders is integral.
No, great. I mean, whilst we wait for other questions to come through, I do just have a very quick poll. Thank you for tuning in today, obviously. Please feel free to keep throwing questions at us. I'll just launch the poll now. Just very, very lightweight question around whether or not you'd like to hear from the Mayday or Fathom team after the session today. We don't want to bother you with things if it's not relevant, but let us know if you would be keen for a chat, and we can kind of sort that out afterwards. So I'll leave that up for a little bit. Q&A is still very much open if anyone would like to ask us anything. Hopefully that's been useful either way. I'll also just throw up another slide whilst the poll is open regarding Stacked, which is coming up on the 8th of May. So if anyone here is based in Sydney, if you are, I suppose, focused on building out your tech stack on Xero, whether or not you're already there with it, whether or not you're still exploring it, you'd like to hear from some other people, some experts, some people who have done it before. That's what Stacked is for. So it's a conference, 1-day conference. Fathom and Mayday will both be there exhibiting. It's pretty affordable considering the conferences that are out there. All very much focused on in-house finance leaders, in-house finance teams, what they're doing on Xero. We just kind of felt that there wasn't a space for this conversation to be happening. So we felt like there needed to be. And that's why Stacked was born. We ran it in London last year, so bringing it down to Sydney this time, hopefully a little bit closer for you all. But yeah, it would be great to see a few of you there. I know based on the names I can see in the attendees today, there will be a few of you there, so looking forward to catching up. But yeah, I haven't got any other questions come through, so I'm hoping that means we're all on the same page and we're all good. So I will wrap it there. We'll obviously upload the recording and share it with you all if you're keen to check it out or share it with the team or anything like that. So Stian, Jesse, Ryan, been a pleasure. Thank you for your time, and yeah, it's been really good to chat with you all.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks, guys.
Appreciate it.
No worries. Okay. All right. See you, everyone. Bye.